In this video, we will learn about linear relationship and the sample correlation coefficient. Below are 4 bivariate data sets and the scatter plot for each. Note that each scatter plot is displayed on the same scale. Each data set is made up of sample values drawn from a population. Answer the following questions. The same response may be the correct answer for more than one question. First of all, I would like to remind you what the sample correlation coefficient is telling us about potential linear relationship in a sample that represents the population. The diagram below at the bottom of the page shows us that the value of sample correlation coefficient R will indicate a strong linear relationship if it is approaching a value of 1 or value of -1. When you are in the middle between the 1 and -1 at 0, this sample correlation coefficient tells me that there is no linear relationship. And the farther away from 0 we are, the closer we get to 1 or to -1, the stronger the linear relationship becomes. The positive and negative sign indicate that slope of the linear relationship is either positive. We have, for example, here an increasing line potentially, or if we have a negative linear correlation, then R also will be a negative value. For example, right here, as you can see, this roughly represents linear relationship and it is a decreasing one. And that's why R for this sample would be negative. So what are our questions in this case? Part 1. Which data set indicates the strongest negative linear relationship between its two variables? When I look at the 4 scatter plots before me, I see that the first one has no relationship that is linear to indicate at all because my points in this set are all over the place. They're scattered. My second figure shows a perfect linear arrangement, but it has a positive slope. Therefore, R cannot be negative for this case. Figure 3 shows me somewhat linear relationship, but it again is increasing, so it has a positive slope and therefore positive R value. The only option we have here that has negative correlation coefficient is the last figure, figure 4. So for this first answer, we're going to say that the data set MN is indicating the strongest negative linear relationship between its two variables if I need to choose between these 4 scatter plots. Part 2. Which data set indicates a perfect positive linear relationship between its two variables? In this case, it is pretty obvious that figure 2 has a perfect linear relationship right here, and it has a positive such relationship. Therefore, my answer here will be the UV dataset. Part 3. Which dataset has an apparent negative but not perfect linear relationship between its two variables? Answer to this question will be same as the answer to question number 1, because figure 4 is the only one that represents negative linear relationship. It's not perfect, but it is definitely there. So I'm going to write the same solution as for part 1. Part 4. In which data set is there evidence of a strong non-linear relationship between the variables? Well, I would say that figure 2 has absolutely obvious, perfect, positive linear relationship. Figure 3 has weak but still positive linear relationship. You could draw a line right there, and your data set will be roughly close to that line. We already talked about figure 4, so the only one potentially that could be answered to this question is figure 1. But I don't really see any relationship that this data indicates. It's not linear, it's not non-linear, it's just not there. So we are going to answer none of the above or something similar. There will be a drop-down menu that will give you option of none, because none of these scatter plots indicate strong, it says strong, non-linear relationship. Let's take a look at another example. Just like before, we have 4 scatter plots provided, and we have to answer 4 questions. I already provided the answers right here, but let's talk about each one individually. Part 1. For which data set is the sample correlation coefficient R closest to -1? As you may remember, negative correlation coefficient tells me that there is a negative linear relationship, or my scatter plot will show roughly linear relationship that is decreasing. When I look at 4 scatter plots, I see that figure 2 and figure 4 fit this description. This data has very weak but still negative decreasing relationship here that is linear. And of course, figure 4 has actually stronger one right here. So between these 4 data sets, the one that has R closest to -1 would be the one that has better, stronger linear relationship that is negative. And that would be figure 4 or set MN. Part 2. Which data set indicates the strongest positive linear relationship between its 2 variables? When we look at our scatter plots again, I see that the only one that clearly has a positive linear relationship is in figure 3. I guess it's the strongest one because the other ones don't indicate positive linear relationship at all. So I'm going to choose a WT data set for this option. Part 3. For which data set is the sample correlation coefficient R equal to 1? Please remember, for R to be equal to +1, it means we would have a perfect alignment of all elements in my sample in a linear pattern with a positive slope. None of these scatter plots fit that bill. This one is completely all over the place. This one does have positive linear relationship, but it's not perfect, and therefore R is not 1, definitely. And figure 2 and figure 4 have negative linear relationships. So my answer for this part 3 is none. Part 4. For which data set is the sample correlation coefficient R closest to 0? Well, remember, when R is closest to 0, it means the data set does not show a linear relationship. The closer you get to 0 with value of R, the less linear relationship you will see. Well, in this case, figure 1, data set XY, gives me a scatter plot that pretty much doesn't show any linear relationship, so this would be an appropriate solution for part 4, the XY data set. Let's take a look at one more example. Part 1. Which data set indicates the strongest negative linear relationship between its 2 variables? When we look at the 4 scatter plots, the 2 that do have a linear relationship that is negative are in figure 3 and figure 4. We see decreasing pattern and it's linear. And obviously between these 2, figure 4 has the strongest one, pretty much perfect linear relationship with a negative slope. So my answer is MN dataset is the one. Part 2. In which dataset is there evidence of a strong non-linear relationship between the two variables? Look at all four scatter plots. Do you see that in figure 2 we have a curve shaping up here like a parabola? So this is a pretty strong pattern, but it's not linear. So we are going to say that the UV dataset is a good fit for this question. Part 3. Which dataset indicates a perfect positive linear relationship between its two variables? All right, let's see. I have non-linear relationship, pretty obvious. I see perfect negative linear relationship. I see, well, somewhat not too weak, not too strong, somewhere pretty good negative linear relationship in figure 3. And figure 1 is the only one that has somewhat positive linear relationship. It's not strong, but it's there. But it's definitely not perfect. Therefore, my answer is none of these fit this bill. The last one, part 4. Which dataset has an apparent positive but not perfect linear relationship between its two variables? In this case, my dataset XY with this scatter plot works pretty well. We have an apparent positive linear relationship, but it's not perfect. So the answer is the XY dataset.